What if I told you that almost everything you think you know about ancient Persia is wrong? The empire that Hollywood shows us as villains in movies like 300 was actually one of the most progressive, tolerant, and advanced civilizations in human history. Today, we're uncovering the untold truths about ancient Persia that will completely change how you see the ancient world. Welcome back to the channel. If you're fascinated by ancient history and the real stories that textbooks don't tell you, you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that subscribe button, because today's journey into ancient Persia is going to blow your mind. Let's dive in. First, let's talk about human rights. Long before the Magna Carta or the American Constitution, Cyrus the Great, the founder of the Persian Empire, created what many consider the world's first charter of human rights. It's called the Cyrus Cylinder. This incredible artifact, a clay cylinder from 539 BC, outlines principles of religious freedom, the abolition of slavery, and the right for people to return to their homelands. Imagine that! Over 2,500 years ago, a king declared that all people were free to worship their own gods, and that no one could be enslaved. This was revolutionary stuff. Next, forget the image of a backward, barbaric empire. Ancient Persia was a hub of innovation. They built the Royal Road, an incredible highway system stretching over 1,600 miles. This wasn't just a dirt path. It had postal stations with fresh horses, allowing messengers to travel across the vast empire in just 7 days a journey that would normally take 3 months. This system connected diverse cultures and fueled trade, science, and the exchange of ideas. They also invented the Qanat, an amazing underground irrigation system that turned arid land into fertile gardens, a technology still used in some parts of the world today. And what about their society? While many ancient cultures treated women as property, Persian women enjoyed a level of freedom and respect that was unheard of. We have records of women owning land, running businesses, and even serving in the military. They were paid equal wages for equal work, a concept that many modern societies still struggle with. This wasn't a tyrannical, oppressive regime. It was a multicultural, cosmopolitan empire where different ethnicities and religions coexisted peacefully. So, the next time you see a movie portraying the Persians as one-dimensional villains, remember the real story. Remember Cyrus the Great and his vision for human rights. Remember the brilliant engineers who built the Royal Road and the Qanats. And remember the society that valued women and diversity. The real ancient Persia was a beacon of light in the ancient world, and its legacy of tolerance and innovation continues to inspire us today. Have you ever wondered which ancient empire was the biggest, the most powerful? If you said Rome, you're not alone, but you'd be wrong. Today, we're diving into the story of an empire so vast, so influential, it literally controlled almost half the world. And no, it's not the one you're thinking of. Let's talk about the incredible, often overlooked, Persian Empire. Picture this. It's around 500 BCE. A man named Darius the Great sits on the throne. Under his rule, the Achaemenid Persian Empire has swelled to an unimaginable size. It stretches from the shores of Greece and the deserts of Libya, across the Middle East, all the way to the Indus Valley. In modern-day India, 3 continents, dozens of cultures, all under one banner. But here's the truly mind-blowing statistic. Historians estimate that, at its peak, the Persian Empire contained about 44% of the entire human population on the planet. Let that sink in. Nearly 1 out of every 2 people alive at the time was a subject of the Persian king. The Roman Empire, even at its largest, never came close to that kind of demographic dominance. So, how did they manage this colossal feat? Brute force and terror? Actually, the opposite. This is what makes the Persians so revolutionary. Before them, you had empires like the Assyrians, who were infamous for their cruelty. They'd conquer a city, burn it to the ground, and forcibly relocate its people to break their spirit. It was a rule based on fear. The Persians, starting with their founder Cyrus the Great, flipped that script completely. Their model of governance was something the world had never seen before. It was a blueprint for a multi-ethnic, multi-religious superstate, built on a surprising foundation: tolerance. When the Persians conquered a new land, like Babylon or Egypt, they didn't force everyone to become Persian. They didn't make them speak the Persian language or worship Persian gods. Instead, they embraced a policy of cultural autonomy, As long as you paid your taxes and didn't start a rebellion, you were largely free to keep your local customs, your language, and your religion. In a famous example, Cyrus the Great not only allowed the Jewish people exiled in Babylon to return to Jerusalem, but he actually funded the rebuilding of their sacred temple. This wasn't just a one-off act of kindness. It was state policy. This strategy was genius. It created a sense of stability and loyalty among conquered peoples that sheer terror could never achieve. To manage this vast and diverse realm, the Persians developed incredible infrastructure. They built the Royal Road, a highway system stretching over 1,600 miles, complete with rest stations and fresh horses for official messengers. A message could cross the empire in about a week, a speed unheard of in the ancient world. They standardized weights, measures, and coinage, which supercharged trade and made the entire empire richer. They created the first large-scale postal service. In many ways, they created the very template for how to run a successful, long-lasting emperor template that others, including Alexander the Great and even the Romans, would later copy. So the next time you think about the great empires of history, don't just picture Roman legions marching in lockstep. Picture a truly globalized world, connected by roads and a shared sense of peace, where dozens of different people ever feel like history is just a long list of brutal conquerors. Well, today we're re-diving into the story of a ruler who broke that mold in a way that's almost hard to believe. We're talking about one of history's most remarkable, yet surprisingly underappreciated figures, Cyrus the Great. So, picture this. It's 539 BCE. Cyrus and his Persian army have just conquered Babylon, one of the most powerful and heavily fortified cities in the ancient world. Now, typically, what happens next in these situations is pretty grim. Looting, destruction, enslavement. Standard ancient conqueror playbook. But what Cyrus did next was completely unprecedented. It was so radical, it still echoes through history today. Instead of burning the city down, enslaving its people, or forcing his own religion on them, Cyrus issued what many historians consider the world's very first declaration of human rights. This declaration wasn't a speech or a scroll. It was inscribed on a small clay artifact that we now call the Cyrus cylinder. This amazing piece of history, written in cuneiform script, lays out some revolutionary ideas. It essentially says that all people have the right to choose their own religion, that everyone is equal regardless of their background, and that slavery should be abolished. Let that sink in. This was 2,500 years ago. The principles were so foundational that the United Nations keeps a replica of the cylinder at their headquarters in New York as a symbol of our shared journey towards human rights. And these weren't just empty words. Cyrus put his principles into action. One of his most famous acts was freeing the Jewish people who had been held in captivity in Babylon for decades. But he didn't just let them go. He actively funded the rebuilding of their sacred temple in Jerusalem and returned the religious artifacts that had been stolen. His actions were so respected that he is the only non-Jewish figure in the Hebrew Bible to be called a Messiah or an anointed one. This wasn't a one-off event, either. Throughout his vast empire, Cyrus freed enslaved populations, returned sacred objects to their original temples, and allowed displaced people to go back to their homelands. Think about the sheer impact of this. At a time when rulers built their legacies on conquest, fear, and subjugation, Cyrus the Great was creating a model of tolerance, respect, and multicultural governance. He was championing ideals that wouldn't become mainstream for millennia. He showed the world that a great empire could be built not just on power, but on humanity. It's a powerful lesson from the ancient world that feels more relevant now than ever. So, what could they actually do? Well, for starters, Persian women could own their own property. They could run businesses and enter into contracts. Historical sources suggest she was one of the most powerful and influential people in the entire empire, advising her husband on major state decisions. Her influence was so significant that it shaped the line of succession. She wasn't just a queen in name. She was a political force to be reckoned with. But here's the part that will really blow your mind. Equal pay for equal work. At Persepolis, the grand ceremonial capital of the empire, archaeologists have unearthed tens of thousands of administrative clay tablets. These are essentially the payroll records of the ancient world. And what did they show? They show that women received the same wages as men for doing the same jobs. There was no gender pay gap for the same role. Not only that, but these records also document a form of maternity leave. New mothers received extra rations of grain and wine for themselves and their babies. This level of social support and economic equality is truly astounding for the ancient world. Now, let's put this into perspective. Compare ancient Persia to classical Athens, a civilization that's often celebrated as the cradle of democracy and Western thought. In democratic Athens, women had virtually no rights. They couldn't vote, couldn't own significant property, and were largely confined to their homes, unseen and unheard in public life. Their primary role was to produce male heirs. So while Athenian men were debating philosophy in the Agora, Persian women were running businesses, managing estates, and influencing imperial policy. It's a fascinating contrast that challenges our assumptions about history and progress. The story of women in ancient Persia is a powerful reminder that history is never as simple as we think. Did you know some of the tech we take for granted was pioneered thousands of years ago in ancient Persia? Their innovations were so groundbreaking. They literally changed the face of the earth and are still influencing us today. Let's start with one of the biggest challenges for any civilization: water. The Persians faced vast, arid landscapes, but they didn't see a problem. They saw an opportunity. They invented the Qanat system, a stunningly clever network of underground aqueducts. These weren't just simple ditches. They were gently sloping tunnels, dug by hand, that tapped into underground water sources in the mountains and carried that water for miles across the desert to cities and farms. This allowed massive cities to flourish in otherwise uninhabitable areas. And get this, some of these Qanats are still functioning today, over 3,000 years after they were built. The idea was so brilliant that it spread across the Middle East, North Africa, and all the way to Spain. But they didn't stop at transforming the land. They also revolutionized communication. Imagine trying to send a message across an empire stretching over 1,500 miles. For the Persians, it wasn't a problem. They built the Royal Road, an ancient superhighway dotted with relay stations every 14 miles or so. At each station, a fresh horse and rider were ready to take the message and gallop to the next. This system was so incredibly fast that a dispatch could travel from one end of the empire to the other in just 7 days, a journey that would normally take 3 months. The Greek historian Herodotus was so impressed, he wrote, "Neither snow nor rain nor heat nor gloom of night stays these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds." Sound familiar? That's because the United States Postal Service adopted a version of this very quote as its unofficial motto. And if you've ever dreamed of paradise, you have the Persians to thank for the word itself. Paradise comes from the Old Persian paradisa, which means enclosed garden. They were masters of creating lush, beautiful, walled gardens that were like oases of tranquility and beauty. In fact, some new research suggests that the legendary Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, might not have been in Babylon at all, but were actually Persian-style gardens built in another city. The list of their inventions just keeps going. They built incredible ice houses, called yak, which were essentially ancient refrigerators that could store ice in the middle of the summer desert. Archaeologists have also found what looks like one of the world's first batteries, the Baghdad Battery, dating back to the Persian period. How did the Persians manage to rule the largest empire the world had ever seen? It wasn't just through conquest. It was through some seriously clever governance. Let's dive into the 3 key strategies that made the Achaemenid Empire a marvel of administration. First up, the satrapy system. Imagine trying to rule a territory stretching from modern-day Libya to India. It's impossible for one person to do it alone. So the Persians divided their empire into provinces called Each satrapy was led by a governor, or satrap, who handled the day-to-day civil administration. But here's where the genius of checks and balances comes in. The satrap wasn't all-powerful. The military commander in that same province didn't report to the satrap. He reported directly to the king. This created a separation of powers, preventing any single governor from getting too ambitious and trying to stage a rebellion with the local army. But they didn't stop there. To keep everyone honest, the king had a network of special agents known as the King SI or the King Esir. These were royal inspectors who traveled throughout the empire, often in secret, observing the satraps and other officials. Their job was to report back directly to the king, ensuring that no one was abusing their power, skimming taxes, or plotting against the throne. It was an ancient system of internal affairs, keeping the massive bureaucracy in line and accountable to the central government. This three-pronged approach, civil governor, independent military commander, and secret inspector, was a masterstroke of political engineering. Next, let's talk standardization. A massive empire needs a functioning economy, and that's hard to do when every region has its own currency, its own way of measuring grain, and its own local laws. The Persian king Darius the Great recognized this and embarked on a huge standardization project. He introduced a universal gold coin, the daric, and a silver coin. For the first time, a merchant in Egypt could use the same money as a merchant in Bactria, thousands of miles away. This made trade incredibly smooth and predictable. Alongside the standardized currency, Darius also implemented standardized weights and measures across the empire. This meant that a bushel of wheat in one province was the exact same amount as a bushel in another. It eliminated confusion and cheating in trade, fostering economic trust and prosperity. He also created a universal legal code based on principles of justice and fairness, which applied to everyone. While local customs were still respected, this overarching legal framework helped to unify the diverse peoples of the empire under a single, predictable system of law. It was this economic and legal glue that really held the empire together. Finally, the Persians were masters of communication and cultural respect, and this is perfectly reflected in their use of languages. Instead of forcing everyone to speak a single language, they embraced multilingualism. Official inscriptions and documents, like the famous Behistun inscription, were often written in 3 different languages: Old Persian, the language of the ruling elite; Babylonian, the language of Mesopotamia; and Elamite, the language of the administrative heartland. This wasn't just practical, it was a powerful political statement. It showed that the Persian kings respected the different cultures and histories of the people they ruled. It ensured that royal decrees and laws were understood by the vast, diverse population. This multilingual Ever wonder why movies always make Persians the bad guys? Think about the movie 300. We see this massive, exotic army of monstrous invaders trying to crush a small band of heroic, freedom-loving Greeks. It's an epic story, but how much of it is actually true? Well, let's talk about that. The Hollywood version of Persia is a fantasy, plain and simple. It's based on accounts written by their biggest rivals, the Greeks. And even then, filmmakers took a lot of creative liberties. For example, the Persian king, Xerxes, wasn't a 10-foot-tall giant covered in piercings. In reality, he was the respected ruler of the Achaemenid Empire, the largest and most diverse empire the world had ever seen, and his legendary immortals. They weren't masked demons. They were an elite, heavy infantry unit of 10,000 professional soldiers. The Greeks called them immortals because their numbers never seemed to drop. Any soldier who was killed or injured was immediately replaced, keeping the unit at a constant strength of exactly 10,000 men. So, what were the Greco-Persian wars really about? It wasn't a simple battle of good versus evil, or freedom versus tyranny. It was a complex series of conflicts, driven by economics and politics. Both sides wanted to control the valuable trade routes in the Aegean Sea. The idea that it was civilization versus barbarism is basically ancient Greek propaganda. In fact, many Greek city-states didn't even fight against Persia. Some of them stayed neutral, and quite a few actually sided with the Persians. Let's get one thing straight. The ancient world wasn't black and white. While Athens had its early form of democracy, it was only for a small fraction of the male population, and their society was built on slavery, just like Sparta's. They were constantly at war with each other. In contrast, the Persian Empire was a massive, multicultural state known for its sophisticated road system, postal service, and its policy of religious and cultural tolerance towards its many different peoples. They allowed local customs and religions to continue, which was a revolutionary idea at the time. The legacy of Persia wasn't one of brutal tyranny. It was one of incredible administrative and cultural achievements that influenced civilizations for centuries to come, from its art and architecture to its ideas about governance. So next time you see Persians portrayed as one-dimensional villains, remember, there's a much richer and more Ever wondered what happened to the mighty Persian Empire? You know, the one that built incredible cities like Persepolis and created the world's first human rights charter? Why does it feel like they just vanished from history? Well, they didn't. And the real story is way more interesting. Let's dive in. The common story is that Alexander the Great swept in around 331 BCE and conquered the Persian Empire, and that was the end. But here has the twist. Alexander was so blown away by Persian culture that he did non just conquer, embraced Italiano. He started wearing Persian clothes, adopted their court customs, and even encouraged his soldiers to marry Persian women. He dreamed of blending Greek and Persian cultures into a new, vibrant civilization. His successors, the Seleucids, also kept many of the brilliant Persian administrative systems in place because, well, they just worked so well. So, Persia didn't just disappear. After Alexander's empire fractured, new powers rose from the same land. First, the Parthians, who were fierce warriors and a constant thorn in the side of the Roman Empire for centuries. Then came the Sasanian Empire, another Persian powerhouse that rivaled Rome and Byzantium, carrying the torch of Persian culture forward. For over 1,000 years, the Persian language was the language of art, poetry, and government across much of Central and South Asia. Think of it like Latin in Europe. It was the language of the educated and the elite. The influence didn't stop there. When the Islamic Golden Age began, who were some of the leading lights in science, medicine, and philosophy? Persian scholars. They translated ancient Greek and Roman texts, saving them from being lost, and added their own groundbreaking discoveries. Ever admired the intricate designs in Islamic art? The stunning architecture of mosques, or the beauty of a formal garden? Much of that has roots in Persian artistic traditions. From the Mughal Empire in India to the courts of Spain, Persian culture left its elegant mark. And what about today? Modern-day Iran is the direct cultural heir to ancient Persia. The language, Farsi, is a modern form of Persian. Cultural traditions, holidays like Nowruz, and a rich artistic heritage are all alive and well. Beyond Iran, Persian influence is still strong in countries like Afghanistan, Tajikistan, and even parts of India and Pakistan. Concepts we take for granted, like organized postal systems and early ideas about human rights, can be traced back to the innovations of the ancient Persians. So, there you have it. The untold truth of ancient Persia. Not the villains you see in Hollywood movies, but pioneers of human rights, champions of tolerance, innovative administrators, and builders of one of history's greatest civilizations. The Persian Empire showed the world that diversity could be a strength, that conquered peoples didn't need to be oppressed, and that tolerance and respect could be the very foundation of a stable, long-lasting empire. These are lessons that are still incredibly relevant today, aren't they? If this video changed your perspective on ancient Persia, give it a thumbs up and let me know in the comments what surprised you the most. Should we do more deep dives into misunderstood ancient civilizations? Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our future videos. Thanks for watching.